Have you ever felt just, well, completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of news? Like every headline feels urgent, but it's so hard to really get what's actually going on underneath.
Yeah, it's a lot to filter through, especially when things are happening far away.
Exactly. So today we're going to try and cut through some of that noise. We're doing a deep dive into a really specific and frankly critical situation unfolding in Kenya. We'll be focusing on some recent events that, well, they really shine a light on some profound challenges with governance there and specifically with policing.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on some compelling excerpts from a YouTube video transcript. It's from DW News titled, Kenyan Police Shoot Traitor at Protests in Nairobi. It gives a very raw, very immediate, on-the-ground perspective, which I think is, invaluable for really understanding the human side of all this.
Absolutely. So our mission today, essentially, is to unpack the key events from that source. We want to look at the reactions, both public and official, and try to grasp the bigger, maybe more sobering implications these incidents have. For Kenyan society, yes, but also for its governing institutions.
Yeah, trying to get a clearer picture of what's happening and, crucially, why it matters, especially that relationship between the state and its people.
Okay, so with that set up, let's dive in. Let's start with the individual tragedy that really seems to have ignited this latest wave of anger.
And that's really the core of it, isn't it? The spark. It's the tragic death of a man named Albert Ojiang. His story is absolutely central to understanding why people are so outraged right now.
It really is a heartbreaking story. Albert Ojiang, he was only 31, a blogger, a teacher. And his death isn't just some statistic, right? It's the catalyst. He was arrested for something many of us do all the time, social media posts.
Specifically, criticizing a senior police officer, according to the source.
Right. Which just that context alone, arresting someone for what looks like exercising free expression, it already sets a pretty concerning tone, doesn't it?
It does. And what's particularly alarming, I think, is the timeline and the complete conflicting stories about his death. He died just days after being arrested, but while in police custody.
Okay.
Now, the police initially said he committed suicide, but then an independent autopsy came out.
Yeah.
And it starkly contradicted the official story. It pointed to assault as the cause of death. This immediate, very public contradiction. Well, it's a critical point. What does that do to public trust right from the get-go?
Oh, absolutely. It destroys it, right? That contradiction, that immediate feeling of disbelief, it just ignited something. Kenyans have been protesting for days over his killing. And the demand is quite simple, but also profound. They want justice. They want the police officers responsible arrested and actually brought to book. It's not just about this one man. It feels like it taps into this deeper desire for accountability.
From the very institutions that are supposed to protect them.
Exactly.
And, that public pressure has led to some movement. The force does mention that some Kenyan police officers have appeared in court in connection with Ojiang's death.
Okay, so there's been some legal action.
Some. But the protests are continuing, which suggests, that people feel the issue of real accountability is far from resolved. It's a start, maybe, but it hasn't really calmed things down, especially given past experiences where these kinds of appearances didn't lead to much.
Right. Is it real progress or just, a gesture because of the pressure?
That's the question, isn't it?
So as these protests were happening, the situation on the ground, especially in Nairobi, it got really intense. The DW report describes a very tense atmosphere. Police firing tear gas, attacking protesters, trying to restore order, I suppose.
But that wasn't all that was happening. There were other really chilling elements that complicated things.
Yeah.
The DW correspondent saw dozens of men on motorbikes.
Yeah.
These guys were armed with whips and clubs, and they were joining in on the attack.
Turning the police or just chaos.
It's described as them being masked, terrorizing people, stealing things even from journalists, like cameras. It adds this really sinister layer, like, who were these guys? Whose side were they actually on?
Wow. That really blurs the lines, doesn't it, between state action and something else entirely.
It really does. It erodes trust even further.
And it creates this terrifying scene.
Yeah.
Which was witnessed firsthand by the DW correspondent Felix Moringa. He saw something truly horrifying involving an innocent civilian.
Yeah. He described these clashes at a road junction right in the central business district. Police pushing back protesters, protesters throwing stones.
Standard protest scene, unfortunately.
Right. But in the middle of this, or rather off to the side, was this civilian trader just standing there trying to hide from the tear gas and the stones. He was selling surgical masks to the protesters, just trying to make a living amidst the chaos.
Okay, so just an ordinary person caught up in it.
Exactly. And then what happened next is just incredibly stark. A group of police arrived in Land Cruisers. 2 officers walked up to this trader. The source says the trader actually showed them the masks he was selling. Almost like, hey, I'm just here selling masks. I'm not part of the fight.
Trying to show he wasn't a threat.
Yeah. But then one officer apparently shoved him with his gun. The other slapped him. And then one of them just shot him at close range.
Oh, my God.
And the correspondent's description is chilling. He said the officer just walked away, as if nothing had happened, got back in the Land Cruiser, just cold.
And the crowd, what did they do?
People were shouting, obviously horrified. You have killed him! You have killed him!
And the police response to that?
More tear gas. They threw more tear gas at the people calling them out.
Unbelievable, that response.
Yeah.
It just speaks volumes about impunity, doesn't it? A complete disregard.
Right. It really raises that fundamental question,
Yep.
When the people meant to protect you are the source of terror, what does that do to the whole idea of a state of a society?
Yeah. And what's really, I guess, fascinating isn't the right word, but deeply concerning is how the stories diverge after that shooting.
Right, the discrepancy. The source points this out very clearly. The police put out a statement. They said the officer involved was arrested and would be arraigned in court, which sounds like progress, right? An arrest.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, the police statement denied that the civilian died.
What? How can they deny that? There were witnesses.
Exactly. This isn't just a small detail. It's a fundamental clash over whether someone lived or died, an event witnessed by many people.
So what do the eyewitnesses say?
They tell a completely different story, directly contradicting the police. Numerous witnesses, including journalists who were right there covering the protest, and even the people who apparently carried the traitor away. They all say, unequivocally, that he was shot dead.
Right there on the scene.
Yeah. The DW report is explicit. The police account is not matching the eyewitness account. And that discrepancy, it's not just about facts. It hits right at the heart of trust in official statements, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If the authorities dispute the reality of something so critical, witnessed by so many, what message does that send? How can people trust anything they say? It feels like a significant failure of governance right there.
And this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? If we zoom out, these incidents, Ojiang's death, this shooting, they seem to be part of a much bigger and deeply worrying pattern of police brutality in Kenya.
The source mentions that.
Yes, it reminds us that in past cases of police brutality, officers have, quote, rarely been convicted.
Rarely convicted. That sets a terrible precedent for accountability. It suggests it's systemic, not just a few bad apples.
Precisely. It undermines public trust and points to serious flaws in the justice system. There's this body, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA. They're apparently investigating 60 deaths. 60. From just June and July of last year.
60 deaths. Related to what?
Linked to what people called the Gen Z protests. Remember those? Massive demonstrations, lots of young people against a government finance bill.
I do remember reading about that. So we're talking dozens of deaths under investigation, all connected to state action against citizens protesting.
Yeah. Which brings up the question of how effective these investigations actually are. I mean, despite these inquiries, despite the ongoing protests demanding justice, the source states a critical fact. No police officers have actually been jailed for these atrocities.
None.
None mentioned in the source, no convictions cited. The reality, according to the report, is that police brutality just continues in the country.
That creates a culture of impunity, surely, if officers think they can get away with it.
It emboldens them, doesn't it? And it just chips away, or maybe smashes away, at the social contract.
Yeah.
How can people feel safe when the people with the guns, the people who are supposed to uphold the law, are seen as being above it? That undermines everything.
And the direct result of that lack of accountability is just devastating. The source says Kenyans do not feel safe at the hands of police. Just think about that for a second. The very institution meant to protect you is a source of fear. That's a fundamental crisis of trust. It's a total breakdown, isn't it? Because if you don't have that basic security from the state, everything else gets shaky.
Economic activity, social cohesion, everything.
And the expert from DW News, they concluded it's just too early to tell whether this will be a turning point. For the police force, or more importantly, for the safety of Kenyans?
And that really is the big question hanging over all this, isn't it?
Yeah.
Will these recent events, especially with the shooting caught on camera, the public outrage, the direct challenge to the official story, will this finally be enough to force real systemic change?
Or will the pattern just continue? Impunity wins out, citizens remain vulnerable, justice feels impossible, and that deep mistrust of the government just solidifies.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? We've looked at these tragic deaths like Albert Ojayang's, we've seen the violent clashes in Nairobi, the really disturbing element of those masked attackers.
And those starkly conflicting narratives, what the police say versus what people actually saw.
Right. And it all points back to this deeply entrenched problem of police accountability in Kenya. It paints this picture of, well, a population desperate for justice and safety, facing institutions that often seem untouchable, and really highlights profound failures of governance when the state can't or won't protect its own people.
It really forces you to think about a tough reality. When the institutions meant to protect you are seen as the threat and the paths to justice seem blocked, what does that actually mean for the future, for trust, for stability?
That erosion of trust, it's not just an internal issue for Kenya, is it?
No, it has ripple effects. It can impact the country's stability, its economy, its international standing. It just shows how fragile things can become when that foundational trust breaks down.
So the final thought to leave you with is this. What paths do remain for people demanding change when the official routes to justice seem so obstructed? It's a huge question, and it goes way beyond Kenya, really. It makes you consider just how vital accountability is for any society, and what happens when it feels more like a hope than a guarantee.